I couldn't find worldwide figures, but apparently John and Yoko's Two Virgins album sold 25,000 copies in the United States. That means 25,000 Americans wanted to peel the brown wrapper off of the cover and see John and Yoko naked. And perhaps they were disappointed. This picture was, I think, taken at the same time and perhaps was considered as an alternate cover. Anyway, it's much nicer. I mean, they actually look like two virgins here. Instead of, on the real one, they used two slightly over-the-hill ex-junkies. It has the distinction of having more copies of the album seized. 30,000 were seized in New Jersey by the police for obscenity reasons, and it sold 25,000. It's kind of, I guess it's considered an avant-garde album. I think John was very against that type of posturing until he met Yoko. Speaking of virgins, one time somebody asked me, "Hey, when did you lose your virginity?" I said, "Well, I can't exactly remember, but unfortunately I lost it, and some good Samaritan found it and returned it to me." I said, "Oh no, I got to do this all over again." Anyway, I think the most avant-garde thing on the album is, they asked Paul McCartney to provide a quote, which was printed on the cover. Here's Paul holding a copy of the record, presumably from the Wings era. And he said, "When two saints meet, it is a humbling experience. The long battles to prove he was a saint." Which I think was a kind of a hybrid of some quotes he saw in a magazine article or something that he sort of patched together in a William Burroughs cut-up style of some sort. So to me, that's kind of an avant-garde thing. And speaking of Paul in relation to Two Virgins, the chairman at EMI, Sir Joseph Lockwood, when he was shown the cover, he said, "Well, why not show Paul in the nude? He's so much better looking." Anyway, I think, if not for the cover, this album would not be remembered at all. I got to be a little curious. I've listened to parts of the record. I figured it's on YouTube, and it is. So I wanted to see what kind of comments we had from people. So let's see what we got here. She says, "I'm listening to this in quarantine because I hate myself." This guy says, "The weirdest first date in history." Because, I think that was the night that they made love. They made the record and then they made love. And so it was sort of like a first date. "This genuinely makes my skin crawl. Perfect for Halloween? Yeah. The perfect album to put on to drop the big hint of 'it's time you left.' Horrible. I love it." Well, that's finally a positive review. John Lennon was trolling everyone, even before the internet. "Another perfect album to listen to in the headphones during an MRI." Listen, now I've had an MRI, and you don't need two virgins because, the nurse told me, she said, "Listen, are you frightened by crazy sounds?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Are you claustrophobic?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Because, it's very confining in there and it makes some crazy noises that freak people out." So I said, yeah, because I thought maybe she'd give me some drugs. And so she gave me a Valium and let it set in before they slid me into the tunnel there. God damn it, I never saw Jimi Hendrix in concert, but, this was like as close as you can come. It was a great experience. All right, let's see if this would make a fine double bill with Lou Reed's Metal Machine music. All right, I'm just reflecting what the people are saying. I don't want it to be all negative. This guy says, "Very inspired by beginnings of electronic music. Think Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Pink Floyd picked up on this with saucer full of secrets. Not top 10, but very interesting if you care about the genealogy of music in general. All right, now that's a very balanced, reasonable comment there. Boy, I'd have been pissed off if I paid good money for this. Actually, I think, I don't object to them recording and releasing it, but I think it should have been offered for free. That would have been a very avant-garde thing to do, in the economy of the times. When John sang to Paul, "The only thing you did was yesterday," Paul should have said, "John, two virgins? Anyone?" Okay, here's one last one. This woman says, maybe if Charles Manson bought this album instead of the White Album, he probably would have killed himself instead. So I like, I like Stockhausen. I got nothing against avant-garde music, and I've listened to a little bit of Two Virgins. I wouldn't say it's horrible. It has its merits. Revolution 9 is better. I mean, that has a structure to it, and it's kind of interesting in the context of the White Album, because the White Album essentially was exploring all genres of music, from like a folk Dylan parody like Rocky Raccoon to like a Beach Boys parody with USSR, and even a Beatles song on the White Album. They even included one Beatles song. Birthday is kind of like something the Beatles would have done.